I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. This edition of Parallax Views is brought to you by the $10 and above tier supporters of Parallax Views on Patreon. So, with that in mind, producers credit shoutouts to Galen, Matt, Gunnar, Mark, Simon, Alexander, Catherine, Tilo, Emilia, Jeff, John, Bert, Brian, Elliot, Michael, Brace, James, Nick, Mersham, Galen, Arlen, Bo, Christopher, Michael, Gigadelic Media, Chance, Chase, Dan, Big Bob, David H., Y. Kellerman, Saaded 13, Kathleen, David, Ava, Bob, The West Bank Robbery Podcast, Jamie, Enoch, Gary, Max, Ishtofer, James, Martin, Matthew Ho, Brian, Nobody, Thomas, and Dano. And now on to the show. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. As always, before we get to the introduction of our guest, I want to remind you that it is you, the listener, that will decide the future of this show, as I am now without an advertiser, and as such, I need your help to keep this show going by way of a donation, a monthly donation if you can, to patreon.com/parallaxviews. Again, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. Like I said, I don't have an advertiser right now, and this show is officially supported entirely by listener donations. I can't say I make that much, I'm just scraping by. I ain't exactly rolling in Joe Rogan money here, so your help would be greatly appreciated. Patreon.com/parallaxviews if you want to help out. And now, let's get to our guest. I had the amazing opportunity to speak with cartoonist Eli Valley. If you're a fan of Chapo Trap House, you'll know Eli for his illustration work in the Chapo Guide to Revolution, a manifesto against facts, logic, and reason. You may have also seen him covered in a Vice magazine documentary. He is perhaps America's angriest political cartoonist and satirist, exposing the grotesque nature of American politics today in his comics. His comics have also often dealt with issues pertinent to the American Jewish community. Particularly, much of Eli's work pushes back against right-wing American Jews like Ben Shapiro, and expresses the rage many feel when it comes to a figure like Benjamin Netanyahu. We'll talk about all that and much more in the conversation to follow with Eli Valley. A note that we were both a little bit off, maybe in some of this conversation. I know that Eli has been working on his new book, The Museum of Degenerates, Portraits of the American Grotesque, so he was potentially a bit tired going into this. And on my end, I've been dealing with a lot of things in my personal life. I just had a relative who was in a car accident over the weekend, and as a result, I've been a little bit unfocused. They're okay, the relative. I don't really want to divulge much more, but they're in good health right now. They're okay, but we had to deal with a lot of things involving insurance, and just, you know, it threw me off when this happened. I'll put it that way. So that sort of distracted me away from a lot of things, or has in the past week. So hopefully I'm not too off my game. Hopefully you'll enjoy the conversation with Eli. And with that, let's get right to it with Eli Valley. Welcome to Parallax Views, a guest that I've always wanted to have on the show ever since I first discovered his artwork, probably through Chapo Trap House. Uh, Eli Valley, who has a new book coming out, Museum of Degenerates, Portraits of the American Grotesque. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, and thanks for having me. Excited to discuss stuff with you.
So I guess where I wanted to start in our conversation was maybe just talk a little bit about your background in cartooning and how you got into everything.
Oh, okay. Like broad, universal. How I got into it. I mean, I used to draw when I was in when I was little, high school, college, but then I stopped for a long time, and I only got back into it in my adulthood, serious adulthood. So it's sort of like a path that I wanted to do, and then I left it, and then I fell back into it, and now obviously I'm inspired by it, and it's I
Did you
enjoy
think
it.
it would be so politically, you would end up doing these sort of politically charged cartoons, though? I'm
Yeah, I
curious
mean,
about that.
well, that's the thing. I used to when I was like in college, but then I actually got burnt out by it, and even back then, um, it was very hard to make a living. Yes. Um, yeah, it was hard to make a living, impossible to make a living actually. Newspapers at the time were starting what became like the entire the decimation of the industry, and it was very hard to find like a smaller paper that wanted to hire a local cartoonist when they can just get syndicated stuff for I don't know how much it was, like $20 a week or something, and yeah, so and I always had literary ambitions too. So I was like, if I'm going to sacrifice my life for an artistic pursuit, I'd rather it be writing than cartooning, because I felt, and I still feel to a large degree, this kind of cartooning, political cartooning, is reactive, and I wanted to create sort of what's the word, not sovereign, but autonomous cultural, contribution, not just something that relies on whether Tom Cotton is demanding troops be sent against protesters. So, and I still have that aspiration, but you know, the horizon of time is dwindling. So who knows uh, whatever. Who knows? Who
Who,
knows? I,
who, who
I would
knows
still
if,
like
if,
to do
if
that.
you'll get to that? You're
Yeah.
busy with the cartoons. So
Yeah.
I gotta ask, you're known for these sort of biting cartoons that bite back against, everyone from Meghan McCain trying to appropriate Jewish identity to Benjamin Netanyahu. And I feel like there's something in these cartoons that you can't really convey in the written word, or maybe even, for me, I feel like a lot of the guests I have on are, academic scholars on, say, Israel Palestine. So the way they talk about it is in this much more dry, not emotionally charged tone. And I think sometimes you a lot of people have trouble because of respectability politics talking about these things in a really raw way. And I think your cartoons, in an odd way, they convey how a lot of us are feeling in ways that we may not always publicly express.
Um, Good. Thank you. I don't know. Is that a question, or I don't know if I was supposed
Well, no,
to?
I wanted to
Yeah.
talk about that. Do you think there
Oh,
is
okay.
something to the way cartoons can express things in a way maybe the written word can't, or maybe in the way even we aren't always able to express verbally?
I mean, yes, and I didn't mean to be arrogant or dismissive there, but yeah. I mean, it's a visceral punch, and it there it's like I think when Thomas Nass was going off on Boss Tweed, he Tweed was like my supporters they can't read, but they can see them damn pictures. I don't remember. I'm probably paraphrasing that wrong, but that got to the crux of the potency of visual image, visuals, as opposed to the written word. And but like no matter how acerbic or repugnant, um, my art might be, it is always, always inevitably surpassed by the grotesqueries of reality, as we've seen this year alone, as we've seen for the past decade.
So I'm curious. I mentioned earlier that at least I feel like the cartoons you draw often express things in ways that I don't feel like I can express myself when it comes to these topics. And I think a lot of other people feel that way. Do you ever get compliments saying, "Hey, thank you for doing this cartoon," because I don't feel like I could say it in such an acidic way. I don't think I could. Like I think some of us hold back our anger in a
Hmm.
way that these cartoons don't. And I'm just curious, have you ever gotten that reaction from folks?
Yes, I have. I have. It's just that online, because the haters are so plentiful, I am not able to really keep track as much of the accolades because, with the accolades come the hate, and I just prefer not to deal with any of that shit. I happen on it because sometimes I stumble on it, but so I don't get it enough, but I would like to get it because it's nice to hear because often when you're drawing, I mean, literally you're in a vacuum, with your just like staring at the drawing space and throwing it out there in the world. So yeah, so it's very nice to hear.
I know I didn't include this in my notes, but do the cartoons ever sort of draw themselves in a way? What I mean by that is, when Meghan McCain comes out and, tries to appropriate Jewish identity for her own sort of political agenda, does it ever, does it come like a lightning bolt? Oh, I'm going to draw a cartoon about this.
Yeah, well, sometimes it just feels like it's just literally capturing reality. I remember that McCain thing. I was like coming back from some thing on the subway, and I mean, I think I even like tweeted like, am I going to have to do this? And the reaction was so. I think at the time I was reading reactions more than I have since, but it really inspired me to do it. And I was up all night drawing that. Yeah, but it was kind of like a literal rendition. Also, like the one I posted on Sunday of Josh Shapiro. It
That's
was
the
a
one where he's dressed up as like an IDF soldier and saying, if
yeah.
you don't agree with me, then you hate Jews. And yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
addressing it to Bernie Sanders, people who knocked on doors for Bernie Sanders because it's the whole, hypocrisy of all these just repugnant assholes who are saying that this is anti-Semitism when they never use that for Bernie Sanders, and it's because we can get into that if you want, of the definition of Jewish authenticity in America and in the diaspora, so-called diaspora more broadly. But like that one, I mean, that was like a literal rendition of the argument. It wasn't necessarily what Josh Shapiro was saying. He was letting his subordinates say it, and his defenders, and the uniform was, it came out that he volunteered on an IDF base during, I think, his college year. So it's like it's very very like a literal rendition of reality. I was thinking of doing, I have him saying my uniform. I was thinking of having him say my work outfit, but I actually do, I do plan precisely every word, and I don't need I can, if I can avoid unnecessary blowback, I will. And with that one work outfit, I knew that some people would be saying, "Oh, you're saying that all Jews, when they go to work, they're wearing a foreign country's uniform, that kind of thing." So I'm like, I'm not gonna. That's not the point of the comic, and I don't feel like, allowing bad faith reactors to misinterpret, because I was already, I was told already that it was an anti-Semitic comic because they say everything I do is anti-Semitic, and it's quite often Christians who are saying this. So I didn't. You don't need to give them ammunition if it's not central. I mean, if it's like, if you don't need it in the comic, if the main purpose of the comic can do without that kind of like sort of distracting element.
So the Shapiro comic or cartoon was the one where he's like, if you don't like my uniform, you're a Jew hater, and I think you even put the Klansman reference in there.
Yeah, you hate Jews and you're in the Klan. I mean, it's like they kind of overlap, but because of what he said about protesters, comparing them to the KKK, and there were so many Jews, parenthetically, who were and are involved in the ceasefire movement and protests, it was so abhorrent of him to make that comparison. Not just because Jews are there, but it just like shows the the BS behind it.
I want to get into the topic of this idea of Jewish authenticity, and you've done other interviews about that and spoken about it. But I also wanted to ask about your thoughts on Netanyahu's speech. I know I didn't have that in my notes, but I saw the drawing you put up when he gave that speech, and that's sort of how I saw Netanyahu when I watched that speech. I was like, this is, I mean, my friends called it an embarrassing speech, and I'm like, that doesn't really cover it. It was grotesque. It was disgusting. And I think you really captured that. There's something really monstrous about this man. And,
Looking
I
at
was wondering.
yeah, I mean, that's another literal rendition. It was sort of like wish fulfillment. It wasn't like the most complicated or multi-layered comics. It was one of those that's more of a visceral shout of rage. It was just so everyone I know who has any conscience was speechless and horrified that this genocidal criminal was not only speaking to Congress but had been invited there by the supposed party that is not fascist, supposedly. I mean,
And given multiple standing ovations, which was, oh my God.
yeah, it's sickening. It really is sickening. Yeah, I've no words. There are so many layers to how sickening it was. But like the guy who invited him initially is a Christo-fascist, and then he's joined by Schumer, even after Schumer gave his obligatory "I don't like Netanyahu" speech. Yeah, it's really I am speechless still. So that wasn't a very it was a shot of rage comic.
Right.
Yeah.
So with regards to that idea of Jewish authenticity, what does that mean to you? What does Jewish authenticity mean in your mind?
Well, I mean, I'm very I think it's very important. I forget. Are you Jewish? I don't know if you are.
I'm not Jewish.
I just don't know which. I didn't really think so, but I just wanted to curious if we're I know this is not a Jewish podcast, but no, within the Jewish world, first of all, I want to say, there are a multiplicity of ways of being Jewish. It's not a blood religion you can convert, obviously, and there are regional and geographic and spiritual diversities. So I'm not going to say what is authentic, but what bothers me is what is deemed authentic by Jewish communal leadership, and that, as I've said repeatedly, is Orthodox Judaism and Zionism, and anything that strays from that is subpar and in many ways pernicious. And a lot of my work tries to fight against that.
I also wanted to ask about the role of the grotesque in your artwork, and I commented to you that in a weird way, some of your art reminds me of one of my favorite comic artists, R. Crumb. Because Crumb's work often portrays the really grotesque aspects of America, and I think we need more artists that portray that grotesqueness. So can you talk about the role of the sort of aesthetically grotesque in your work?
Yeah. I don't know if it was so deliberate, or if I sort of maybe the anger fueled the grotesqueries, but also I was inspired by a lot of both the horror comics of the 1950s, the pre-code, the so-called pre-code comics.
You mean the EC Comics stuff,
yeah,
Vault of Horror, Tales from the Crypt, or?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Well, the thing is, those were the main ones, and I love them. They're great. But also, there were the also rans, the Atlas books, and I need to look it up. I haven't I mean, I have my bookshelf over there. I can just lug them all over. I can't remember all the different titles. Right, Harvey, maybe, I forget. Basically, there were these also rans. It was B noir. It was the comics that because it was such a huge industry at the time. there were comics. The thing about EC Comics was they really ran a very tight kind of O. Henry number of pages, but also the O. Henry short story kind of like sensibility. I think is that it? I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Maybe you can edit this in post if I if I
No,
mischaracterize
I totally get what you're saying. Yeah.
what I'm talking about. Yeah. So yeah, but so the other ones, they're like, they don't have any rules. So they would have, like, instead of having like the traditional, I forget if it's like 6 pages or whatnot, they would have maybe some that's like 3 pages, some that's 12 pages. The art was like really, really varied in terms of talent and ability. And the colors were just so wild. And that like sort of partly because, like with Being Noir, that they were restricted by budget. And so sometimes you could have like really just like fantastic hallucinatory filmmaking as a result of the confinements. And in a similar way, I think a lot of these also ran comics were sort of like entered this hallucinatory realm, uh, maybe because they didn't have quite the budget, and so they were sort of like allowing more to go through. Sometimes, and it was pre-code, and so it was before like the Comics Code Authority was a self-regulatory set of inhibitions on the industry.
Right. There's that whole period where, there's the moral panic about comics are ruining the minds of children. Yeah, yeah. And the pre-code is before that. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, Henry, looks good. I would just quickly Google that. All right, Zoom. Wait, where were we? Okay, so yes, the pulp horror is very, very inspiring, but also like I mean, the art in the Weimar era in Europe that was deemed degenerate by people like Otto Dix and George Gross. Also, there were some Yiddish cartoonists like Leon Israel, who went by the pen name Lola, who were just viscerally really on point. So there's like a whole bunch of different cartoonists, both Jewish and not Jewish, that and of course the Mad comic sensibility, which is Mad was also EC Comics, and also often they were doing bits making fun of their own horror titles.
I was going to ask you if Mad influenced you at all,
Oh
so
yeah,
I was right.
Mad is the main one actually. But you talked about Grotesqueries in particular, so I was thinking about the illustrative aspect, but Mad in terms of the humor and the over the top, wild cacophony of I don't want to mix everything up, but Larry David kind of arguments inside the panels was very inspiring, and sort of early on was a guide. I mean, back when I was doing comics for the Forward, I was doing these broadsheets, multi-panel cacophonies in many respects, but also really highly planned narratives. And so my comics more recently, and past few years, have been single panels, which I used to really dismiss, but I feel like they capture the current sort of reaction to where we are better than satirical multi-panel narratives. And so my current work is less mad in terms of narrative, but maybe it's still mad in terms of artistic style.
I also wanted to ask, I love the title of your upcoming book, Museum of Degenerates, and that term degenerates gets used a lot by like the alt-right, those awful people. But, I like that term degenerate in some ways when it comes to describing, these hideous figures like Netanyahu. I think those people are the real degenerates. So I actually like the title. Why did you choose that title, or did you choose it? Was it foisted on you, or did you come up with it, or
came up with it? I don't know how much I should reveal now, because I don't want to give my haters ammunition prior to publication, but the degenerates, I have this very lengthy introduction in the book talking about the history of the term, the way it was popularized, and how that sort of glided into the beginnings of Zionism. And I sort of like give this little history of it all, and up until how I'm using the term today, like co-opting it from them. But yes, it was totally deliberate, and it's it's yeah, I don't know.
So
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, what do you think the biggest misconceptions people have about your work?
Well, I mean, the more on, like the ill-informed misconception is that it's self-hating or anti-Semitic. I mean, I don't even know, like I've dealt with that shit for decades, I guess, and it's like it's tiresome to even go into at this point. But it is related to the authenticity thing. If you're not Zionist and not Orthodox, then you are self-hating by definition, and according to the way we've been brainwashed. So that's like, but that's a misconception, unfortunately, that like people, I get it from the Jewish community, not from the Jewish community, but from individuals on the Jewish right, and certain communal structures, of course, like the ADL. But they aren't necessarily ill-informed; they're just bad faith. What I don't like is, I don't like that, obviously, but what I also don't like is when people who are outside the Jewish community assume it, like, because they hear it from the Jewish right and from people like Meghan McCain, and they're like, oh, he must be the anti-Semitic cartoonist because it's repeated so much that it becomes like sort of the line, and that really pisses me off. Obviously, I mean, it's one thing to have a argument within the family, but then when people who have been instrumentalizing Jews for years now are calling me an anti-Semite, that's just disgusting. And it's one reason that the reaction to McCain comic was so infuriating. But anyway, but the other the misconception, I don't like it when people assume that these are not, well informed, sort of confrontations and what's the word? Grappling with Jewish thought and history. Sorry.
Do you think
Sorry.
sometimes people see the like rage in the cartoon or the rage in the comic, and they overlook that it is based on really informed views?
Yes, but also like specifically Jewishly, I think if they are extremely ignorant about Jewish history and Jewish intellectual thought, they will see some of the things I'm doing, and they have no bedrock upon which to place it, and so they'll think it's based on ignorance when it's actually it's a conversation with history in some ways, that annoys me. Another thing that is a misconception I don't really enjoy is when they think my satire of Zionism is literal, sort of, like I was once told that this diaspora boy character is a self-portrait, and I understand that's a difficult thing because I have it as my profile picture and all, so they think that they don't realize that I'm making fun of Zionist anti-Semitism. They think that that I'm making fun of myself, it's self-deprecating, whatever. And that is frustrating, but it's like sort of, it's hard to avoid. I have it as my profile picture. I was thinking of changing it though with a new book, putting in one of the skulls from the cover and just like, new page kind of thing.
I know this is probably, you've been asked this a million times, but where did the idea come from for Diaspora Boy? What are the origins of that?
Do you have Diaspora Boy, the book?
Yeah, I have it. It's in
Okay.
storage because I moved
Okay.
recently.
No, it's okay because I go into a lot there, but it's interesting because there's a lot that I left out, and I realized afterwards, oh man, I could have added that too. But that stuff, I don't remember exactly the year, if it was 2008 or so, but that was during an era of blogs, and all of us with our day jobs were sitting there arguing online. I don't know. There was the famous one, something awful stuff, but then there were also these, I was never involved in that, but I was involved in these like Jewish blog discourses, and we would always argue. And there were these Zionists who were just like, spouting the most obnoxious and essentially hateful, self-hateful, in my view, views about diaspora Jews, and saying, if you don't support Israel, then you dislike yourself, all that stuff. I don't even need to repeat it now, but we would get in these arguments over it, and around that time also, Aleph Bet Yehoshua, this Abe Yehoshua in English, Israeli writer whose writing I actually I enjoyed a lot at the time, just like stylistically. And it's interesting. He's like, liberal Zionist. Like peace now type of person who, who doesn't like right-wing Zionists, but still is firmly Zionist. He had such extreme views, like very typical hardcore Zionist elimination of the exile, elimination of the diaspora view, that he's actually the one who said that if you're in the diaspora, you're just masturbating. It's as opposed to the real thing. I used that quote in Diaspora Boy in the initial comic for it. And he said this stuff back in like maybe 2007 or so, and it caused such a tumult in the Jewish world that American Jewish Committee, I believe, put out an entire like not book, but like PDF, and I'm sure it was reproduced at the time, of like conversation starters about when he shat all over world Jewry. And so it was actually within the Jewish world, it was a very sort of big debate at the time, and that's for it's like with Diaspora Boy I wrote about all this stuff, but for some reason I forgot the Alpha Yehoshua stuff, which is interesting. It was like just like some blind spot in my mind, so it's like if I ever do a new introduction I'll have to go into that. But so basically, your question, it came from blogs, it came from my own experiences growing up and dealing with people known as shlichim, which means like messengers. They're people that Israel sends all over the world to like work in summer camps and teach us how to be good Jews. And it's just like really, it's really problematic. To the core, it's problematic. And things like that stuff with Abe Yehoshua, it all coalesced. And I just wanted to like do a comic because the view is that Israel is a superhero and we're all Untermenschen. And so I just drew that basically. So yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
In the past, I've had conversations with people like Peter Beinart, whose work I really respect, and even Ron Campais from the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. I think we have very different politics, me and Ron, but I enjoy talking to him.
Yeah,
we've talked about the issue of American Jewish leadership, or the term they used was the Jewish American establishment. I'm wary of using that term for various reasons, but what I wanted to ask you about was, is there sort of a disconnect between people in the Jewish American leadership and just Jewish Americans at large? Because I think sometimes you have these figures like, say, an Abe Foxman that will kind of speak as if they are the voice of the common Jewish American. And I think sometimes there is that disconnect where, well, sometimes the leadership is not always in agreement with the vast multiplicity of Jewish Americans out there.
Yes, the leadership is unelected. It is inordinately influenced by donors who keep the institutions running, and it is disproportionately right-wing, and it has done a lot of damage to American Jewry, in my view. Obviously, there are good things that have come from communal leadership in terms of activism on issues unrelated to Israel. But when it comes to Zionism, the view is hard right. The view is actually extremist right. It's pro-Netanyahu, and it's been that way for decades. And that is like, that's extreme. I mean, we cannot, just because he is the leader of Israel, we cannot forget this man is a far-right extremist aligned with terrorists, an actual terrorist. And so this is the line of the American Jewish leadership. We have an organization called Conference of Presidents, which gives the official viewpoints of American Jewry, and it is supported by dozens of organizations that any of them can leave and make a statement saying we are not going to support this extremist leadership anymore, because they always take the most hardline views. They were pro-Iraq war. They have been pro-Iran war for the past, ever since a decade at least. And there are supposedly progressive organizations like HIAS and like reform movements, supposedly progressive, and others that continue to to give this organization legitimacy, and I and others have been begging them to leave this organization for years, because without their veneer of legitimacy, the Conference of Presidents will be known as fringe right-wing voices like the Zionist Organization of America, which is read by an absolute, anti-Semitic bigot, Mort Klein, right?
Yeah, Mort Klein, like, literally has defended Donald Trump. Anything anti-Semitic that was said by Trump, he argues, oh, well, he's a friend of Israel, so he loves the Jewish people. It's
I'm talking. Okay, good. Okay, good. So anyway, Conference of Presidents is essentially his. It's essentially his political view. They intersect, but they have things like HIAS giving them legitimacy. So if organizations like HIAS and Reform Movement and others would back out, then it would just be another Zionist Organization of America, and they wouldn't be taken as seriously. And so it's a communal tragedy, that all these organizations continue. And this is only one example, but it's such a visible one.
Yeah, and as an outsider looking in, it does seem like certain groups, like, for instance, the Jewish News Syndicate, which is very right-wing, and Zionist Organization of America, they even the most moderate critics of, say, Netanyahu or certain Israeli policies, like, say, J Street, will get called, pro-Hamas or terrorists. And it's like there is this censorship amongst elements of this sort of the Jewish American right wing and their apparatuses.
J Street wasn't even allowed into the Conference of Presidents. They were considered, the Conference of Presidents had these like extremist right wing groups, but they wouldn't allow J Street in because they're considered, beyond the pale. When their views are at this point, middle to right, actually, but also representative of far more American Jews than some of the organizations, these extremist organizations that are allowed within, or not necessarily extremist, but it's extremist as a result. But some of these organizations on the right that comprise their membership.
That leads me to something I wanted to get into that I only just learned about because of the VP pick being Walz rather than Shapiro. I saw that I'm probably mispronouncing her name, but what's that?
Sorry, I thought you were talking Batya.
I was going to mention Batya. Yes, Batya Unger Sargon, who was going on about, they didn't pick Shapiro, and that's because Democrats hate Jewish people and they can't allow there to be a Jewish vice president. They've given in to the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas people in the Democratic wing. And I just looked at that and I said, who are you to claim that you can speak for, the masses of Jewish Americans out there? Who gave you that right? And it's very bizarre to me that these people act like they're the voice of Jewish America.
I don't want to go into a long spiel about all that. I just don't even know what to say.
Well, I'm not even thinking.
This is one example, obviously.
I'm not thinking even specifically about her, but people like her and others. I keep seeing this line of, this is a betrayal of what Jewish Americans want because they picked Walz over Shapiro to be the VP pick. And I'm thinking to myself, well, how do you know that? I'm not sure that Shapiro's views represent the whole of American Jewish political thought. And I just, do you see what I'm getting at? it seems so dishonest to me.
Oh, it's and it's also infuriating. And it's a lie. It's just like, they're first of all, they're in bed with people who incited synagogue shooters. And they're instrumentalizing Jews as part of this Christo-fascist agenda and Zionist agenda. They do intersect because they're both ethno-nationalist, and using us as pawns in this, in this nightmare, in this, eschatological nightmare.
It's just very weird because, like you said, a group like J Street, which is pretty, it's a very middle of the road and even arguably, as you said, right of center on these issues. But I think that's more representative of American Jewish views at large than,
Yeah, I mean,
whatever Botch is saying. It's
yeah, but there's so many layers to how absurd this is. Um, Bernie Sanders was the choice of the left, and they never made this comment during attacks on Bernie Sanders. Kamala is married to a Jewish man, and they're acting like they're anti-Semites for not picking Josh Shapiro. Pritzker was in the running. He's Jewish. They're not, like everything they're saying is just a lie to try and, again, paint the Democrats who get, 4 out of 5 Jewish votes every election as anti-Semites. And again, when they're doing it on behalf of a movement that engages in great replacement, a conspiracy, blood libel accusations. QAnon is like this blood libel terrorist movement, which is at the heart, or it has been at the heart of the GOP base, and maybe it's not as active now, but Trump spews anti-Semitic invective every week. It's just it's a farce, and that anyone would take them seriously is really concerning. I think if you just look at Ben Shapiro's tweets today, it's just like, I mean, he's melting down over this.
I did not see his tweets. What happened with that?
Well, I mean, it's not just his tweets, but he's been retweeting every single right-wing Jewish person who's saying that this is a betrayal of the American Jewish people. I'm afraid for us now. I would never vote for Democrat again. All this kind of absurd shit. Yeah. Oh, man, it's ugly and it's so cynical, I mean, Ben Shapiro, as I shared on Twitter just before we spoke, but he went on a proto-Nazi podcast, which, like a Hitler adulating podcast, the most anti-Semitic thing you can imagine. And he spouted anti-Semitic Nazi level shit about American Jews trying to destroy Christianity. He said that Hollywood Jews are brainwashing Americans to support these causes. It was Nazi level shit. If anyone on the left or anyone even in the center had said anything like that, their career would be over. They would not be a public voice. But again, because we define authenticity through an Orthodox and a Zionist lens, Ben Shapiro gets away with it. He gets away with Nazi level ideology, so-called Judeo-Christian bullshit. Because of what we consider to be authentic.
I know this is probably
wait, can I just let me just clarify? Nazi level shit, Judeo-Christian is separate from that. He uses Judeo-Christian as sort of a mask for Christianity, essentially. I don't want to make it sound like Judeo-Christian and Nazi level invective is the same. So whatever.
No, I appreciate that clarification. This is maybe too big of a question in some ways, but how did we get to this point where, you said that there's this defining of Jewish authenticity as either Orthodox Judaism or Zionism, and that completely leaves out, I would call it the Jewish radical tradition that fights for social justice, liberatory movements, and that is a big part of Jewish history, in my view. So how did we get to this point where that Jewish radical tradition and that Jewish social justice tradition is completely left out of what it means to be Jewish or to be authentically Jewish?
I mean, it's partly, communal structures and power with like the lowercase p for power, like donors, institutional frameworks. They're not going to be in favor of like radical activism. And just as much Zionism and Israel, especially after 1967, which became a dominant or the dominant expression of Jewish identity in America. And, for a number, partly because it's prioritizing Israel stuff, but also because ultimately, despite the propaganda about, socialist Zionism, ethno-nationalist visions of Judaism are incompatible with multicultural and multi-ethnic progressive activism for more equal societies, period. And that's one of the reasons you have far-right movements and actual Nazi movements supporting Israel. Sorry, it looks like it's going to rain here, and so I'm just looking at the clouds out there.
I also wanted to ask you about another thing that gets ignored. You know, there's constantly this refrain from the Shapiros of the world that anti-Zionist Jews are not really Jewish. They've betrayed their Judaism. And, you know, there's a recent book that came out, and I'm blanking on the title, but I think it was edited by Jeffrey Levin, that literally is about the history of American Jewish anti-Zionism. And I feel like that's another tradition that is completely overlooked by these Shapiro type characters.
Well, not just overlooked, but erased. And what you just mentioned is a part of the whole, definition of Judaism as, the authentic versions of Judaism are exclusively Zionist and Orthodox, in this case, Zionist. I have that book you're talking about too. I haven't opened it yet because, a number of reasons, but it looks great. And there's a couple other books like that just came out. Yeah. The Jewish community in America has been sort of invested in a project that has suffused every aspect of Jewish life, including our education. And so it's gonna take a lot. We're only at the beginning stages, unfortunately, but it's going to take a lot to sort of break away from that because as we can see now, it hasn't been healthy.
There were just a few more things I wanted to ask you about. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I know you did a cartoon many years back of Abe Foxman that was lampooning him, and Abe Foxman was the head of the ADL before. I'm blanking on who. What's that?
Greenblatt.
Right, Jonathan Greenblatt. And it's weird because I always say people always say, "Oh, the ADL has only just started going down this bad path with Greenblatt." And I'm like, well, I think there's very legitimate criticisms to be made of Foxman, and you made those criticisms, and Foxman, I guess, decried your work on that front. Can you talk about what led you to make that cartoon of Foxman, and what are your thoughts on the ADL and where it has gone since Foxman?
Well, first of all, I did more than one cartoon involving Foxman, but there was one that was the last straw, and that led him to make phone calls and basically terminate my relationship with the Forward, which was very unfortunate. But it's so weird because now Foxman is like this grandpa figure looking at like what has been wrought since, and like Greenblatt, who many thought would be a more moderating figure because he came out of the Obama either administration or circles as like a social entrepreneur, water bottle, whatever. I don't know. I don't remember the details of that. They assumed that he would maybe be more attuned to younger generations and less, militantly Zionist. Well, that was all wrong. Either he was, Zionist, militantly Zionist from the start, or he just realized, he has a good salary, and it's good to keep that salary once you get that good salary. And with these donors, and it's not meant to be like in a cabal sense, but it's just like it happens to be, the donors are right wing, and he will placate those donors. Now, I don't know if it's his views or if it's cynical or if it's a mixture of both, but the bottom line is he has directed the ADL into a place where it's calling Jews anti-Semites and terrorists for not being.
There's a really sick irony to it in a way. Because on one hand, you have Greenblatt screaming to the high heavens about the threat of anti-Semitism from the left. But on the other hand, you have him buddying up and speaking highly of Elon Musk, who literally has supported this, like, Jews are behind a white genocide conspiracy. And, it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And I think you see it with Netanyahu as well, where Netanyahu is increasingly buddying up with far-right elements in Europe. And yet these are the people yelling anti-Semitism towards anyone who is critical of Israel, while they themselves are the ones teaming up with anti-Semites. It's like we live in this bizarro mirror world universe with these people.
Bizarre what world? I'm sorry.
Like a mirror world. It's like
Oh
they live in
yeah.
an alternate reality.
Well, it's basically it's the reality I've been drawing this bizarre world for the past over like 15 years or so, and now the stuff I've been drawing is like just becoming reality. And I'm not saying that to flatter myself. I'm just saying it's like this is the world I've been in, and so it's no longer a surprise to me. But yes, the embrace of just like open anti-Semites, Nazis, and the like, it's not exceptional. It's pretty uniform at this point on the part of major Zionist leaders. Like it's just absurd. The Minister of Diaspora Affairs, which is such a ridiculous name to begin with, but this guy who was just like a fascist, Chikli in Israel, he buddies up with anti-Semitic fascist leaders in Europe and in America, and that's just par for the course. That okay, so the leaders of Israel who are meant to represent diaspora Jews are anti-Semites, and that's just the way it is now. That's just like some crazy, just absurd dystopia that we are it's just our reality.
Last two things I wanted to ask you. I've talked to a lot of people over the years involved with commenting on Israel, Palestine, and Jewish political culture here in the U.S. And it's included people like Gideon Levy, who I think is a very interesting person. I don't always agree with him on every little issue, but I know he's paid a bit of a price for his writing on Gaza and his reporting over the years in Haaretz. Do you feel like you've paid any type of price for the approach you've taken to your cartooning?
I mean, sure. I don't like complain. I'm not like a right-wing grifter who will talk incessantly about how they're being persecuted. And
that's why I was worried about asking this question, because I know you don't consider yourself you don't want to play this victim.
No, I don't. But I mean, if you just look at things from the outside, I'm not in the forward. I used to be in the forward. I used to be more involved in Jewish communal spaces. Those places, because of the concerted effort by right-wing Jewish and non-Jewish forces, those places are no longer sort of available. And even, printing and publishing and all that, it's unfortunately, people who are not very familiar with stuff, they just hear the constant roar of the right wing, which calls me, they call anti-fascist Jewish art Nazi art for Nazis. I mean, it's just this stuff, and they say it so much, and so yeah, it does have an effect, but
well, that was the second part of the question.
I'm a martyr. No, I don't want to make it like that.
If there is any price, I guess, why has it been worth it for you, regardless of any price that's exacted, because of how you approach things?
It's worth it because I have a lot of I have a lot in me that I want to get out, and I'm able to get it out. They are not able to stop me from getting it out. It's they have not been able to close off my ability to express myself. They have just been able to close off avenues of remuneration for it, right? But I'm still able to express myself, and it resonates with people who I respect, and it the opposite of resonates. What's the word? What is the opposite of resonates? It pisses off people that I have zero respect for. So those two things, resonating with people that I like and pissing off the abominable forces in this world, is gratifying.
This is going to sound like a dumb question, but since we talked about these Jewish American right-wing forces and elements, I mean, do you think it's fair, because like I said, I'm an outsider looking in. I don't think those elements represent the masses of the Jewish American people.
No, they don't.
I think they're a minority.
Yes, they are. But wait, What is your question, though?
No, I was just asking, what is your gauge on where Jewish Americans stand on a lot of issues related to Israel, Palestine, and the like?
Oh, okay. Well, um, I mean, yes, they are a minority. Unfortunately, their voice is so loud that they have been able to shift the community, actual Jews in some ways. Maybe like the so-called lower information types who only get sort of knowledge about Middle East or about Jewish life from their, in many cases, conservative rabbis, not conservative movement, but like, politically conservative rabbis who give sermons like recommending like, farcical diatribes by Alan Dershowitz or Barry Weiss from their pulpits. And that's where like these people, it might be like the main source of information for many people. And so that does unfortunately push Jewish Americans to the right. But it hasn't done so inordinately. We're still, predominantly progressive community, but I do think it has had some effect. And the lies about pro-Palestinian protests and the lies about even Jews who are non-Zionist are pervasive, and eventually they get sort of circulated in the ether, and that's a problem. But ultimately, again, the right is a minority view within the Jewish world.
The last thing I wanted to ask you is, I know you said earlier that your work takes from Jewish intellectual traditions and sort of is part of this long-running Jewish American dialogue about social justice and various issues. What do you want to say to my listeners that are, I have a great number of Palestinian and Palestinian American in particular listeners. What do you want to say to them at this moment? Because I know hurting is an understatement of the year, but what do you want to say to Palestinian American listeners of my program?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it's kind of an open question. I don't want to say anything like, specious or glib on the spot. So maybe give me a little bit more more than that. What do I want to say? I don't want to, anything I can say now. What is happening right now is a horror show, and it's a cataclysm, and I can't, there's nothing I can say that will change the especially not in a soundbite at current
You don't
moment.
want to say anything that would sound cheap, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I understand. Yeah.
I feel your pain. I mean, it's just like, I don't want to it's just not I can't think of a way to anything to say that's yeah.
Words sort of just fail all of us at this moment, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
I hope I did not blindside you with that question.
No, but I'm glad I didn't, throw out, I'm a little tired at this point. So I'm glad I didn't just throw out some empty words, to fill the space.
So how can my listeners keep up with your work? And is there anything you want to plug here real quick?
Well, actually, my book, when is this going to come out?
This should be out in the next day or so.
Oh, wow. Quick. Yeah. So the pre-orders for my book, Museum of Degenerates, just went up last week. So pre-orders are great because it's probably going to determine the print run. And my name on Twitter and Instagram and Patreon, if you want to support, it's always much, much needed, but I'm bad at advertising myself. So, but yeah.
I have that same problem.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, it's hard.
It's hard to be a salesman. In any case, I want to thank you again, Eli Valley, for coming on Parallax Views, and I hope everyone will check out your Patreon and your social media accounts. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that does it for this edition of Parallax Views. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Eli Valley. And as always, if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, and I won't belabor the point after that. Patreon.com/parallaxviews. And with that being said, until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views. with Parallax Views. To Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.